Well, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to moderate this afternoon's career discussion. Welcome to everybody. I expect there'll be a lot of good information shared and a lot of questions and answers. And if your questions don't get answered today, please write them down and please follow up with us or others who may be available to you. We have a good program planned this afternoon. I don't want to take a lot of time beforehand, but I just wanted to say one thing about the value of your diploma and what it means. And maybe some of my students in this class have heard me say this before. But if you went off and bought a stock of IBM or Apple, and you thought maybe it's time to sell, I need money, or the stock might be going down, I'd better sell, you could do that. You could sell it on the open market and realize a profit. What happens when you have a stock that's written on a sheepskin? It's on the side of your wall that says graduate of X university, and you've invested a great deal in that stock, but there's no secondary market for that. You can't say, well, I'm not so happy with my education, or I don't think the school's living up to what it should do, I'm going to sell it. That just doesn't happen. So my point of view here is that to make the most of your diploma one day when you receive that diploma, having earned it, you've got to invest in yourself and in your school and in your community that brought you there, that's going to support you through your professional life, because you've got an unredeemable share of stock in that thing, and if you want it to make value, you've got to give it value, you've got to maintain the value and grow that value. And that's such an important thing to realize when you go out into the world looking for a career, knowing what you're bringing with you. You're representing your school, your education, your background, your vocation, your hopes for the future. Future employers see a lot of things in you. They see things they project onto you. And the important thing is to come away from that exchange, whether it's productive or not, and to grow in your share somehow, grow in your value, at least in your own eyes, and in the eyes of those around you, and in the potential that you bring to the marketplace. So it's a never-ending process. The graduation is just the beginning. It's a commencement, as they say. And it's your opportunity to grow the value in what you've already invested, and to see the value grow, and to reap those rewards over time, so that you're able to give back one day to the same students down the line. So that's all I plan to say today about inspiration of sorts. But we'll get into the techniques and facts and maybe tricks of the trade as to how to promote your vocation in the marketplace, which is a natural thing to do when you're studying philosophy, economics, politics. You wonder, does this have market value? And of course, it has value in and of itself. Academics are its own pursuit. But to make it real, to practice what you believe in the real world, and to find somewhere to do that, where you can support yourself and then some, and then be benevolent and give back to your institution, is really what I think we're talking about today. So I'll briefly introduce our guests. John Erickson is going to speak first. He's the chief of the outreach unit in the Office of Human Resources Management of the United Nations Secretariat. And he's a member of the International Civil Service that's employed by the Secretariat. Versus our second guest, Sarah Husseini, who is an actual delegate to the United Nations, representative of her country as a diplomat at the United Nations for the permanent mission of Saudi Arabia. And among her duties, she oversees elections that take place within the UN body to different UN subsidiary organs and entities. And I'm sure she has many other functions in her mission as well. So we have a unique opportunity to speak to someone in the International Civil Service. The International Civil Service is what staffs the United Nations organization, specialized agencies around the world, UNDP, UNICEF, all of those entities. And we have a representative of the government, a delegate from the Saudi Arabian mission. And so they bring different perspectives as to career paths. So I'd like to offer the floor first to John.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you to Seton University for inviting us today. It was thanks to Sarah's connections, actually. We managed to arrange all this. So it's my first time here. Hopefully it's not the last time. And today we're speaking about employment. We're not talking about diplomacy as such or what the UN does. That, I think you all know that to a great extent. That's why you're here. Today we're talking about jobs, careers, employment. And we don't have too much time, so I'd like to go through it fairly quickly. And we'd like to leave time at the end for Q&A. So please hold your questions till the end of both of our presentations. So we like to show this picture. We think it's very evocative and symbolic of what the UN is supposed to be all about. Saving and helping people as Brazilian peacekeepers in Haiti in 2007 after a hurricane hit the island. Now, some of you, all of you, most of you, I don't know, may be thinking of maybe working for the UN one day. And that's what we'll be talking about today. But first of all, ask yourself why you want to work there. Do you believe in the mission of the UN, the purpose of the UN, and so on? I've been in the UN for over 33 years. It seems like 100. But I still believe in the purpose of the UN, and that's what keeps us going, because we're there to deal with difficult things, not with easy things. Secondly, are you ready and willing to live and work and travel to places you may never have thought of going to before? When living in places where you don't have your extended family or even your immediate family in some cases. Are you ready for the life of an expatriate? Also, the UN is probably the most multicultural international workplace in the world. So you'll have colleagues from everywhere. And that's what makes it fascinating. That's what's so great about going to work every day in the UN, is that you can interact with people from everywhere. You learn a lot from them, but you also have to be culturally sensitive. You have to understand that people react and work in different ways. So ask yourself, are you ready for that sort of workplace? To me, it's great. I can't think of any other place to work. Now, the UN, as you all know, is not just, let's go back. The UN is not just one organization, as you all know. It's an organization, a family of organizations, so about 30 of them, and each one has its own way of recruiting, its own website, its own way of soliciting applications, so be aware of that. There's not one way of applying to all of these at once. You have to go to each one separately, to their separate website, and so on. Can anybody tell me what you think is the most famous UN organization? What comes to mind? Headquarters? Okay, you've been around this school for too long, you know too much already. What do you think most people would say? Oh, wow. I get very different answers normally. Most people say UNICEF, right? But what does UNFPA stand for example? Who knows?
United Population Fund.
Excellent. Most people don't know that. I think it's funds, programs, and agencies. No, UNFPA is the population fund. It also deals with public health, just like UNICEF and WHO, but it's not as well known, but it's headquartered in New York also. Does anybody know which ones are older than the UN itself? Lots of organizations, but some of them are much older than the UN Secretariat itself. Anybody know? Exactly. ILO, 1919, something like that. It's part of the UN family of organizations. There are two that are even much, much older.
Correct.
Okay, you want another answer?
Look at the list in Geneva. We'll give you a clue. Look at the list in Geneva.
Geneva and another place in Switzerland. Yeah, UPU was already mentioned. In the past we used to write on pieces of paper, fold them, put them in envelopes, and put a stamp on the envelope. You don't know what I'm talking about, right? Yes?
The Postal Union headquartered in Bern, Switzerland.
Exactly, that's UPU, Universal Postal Union. It's one that's even a few years older than that.
Isn't the ITU?
Exactly, ITU. So they're all part of the UN family. The point is, they're all separate, they all have different mandates, but the conditions of service is very much the same in all of them once you've joined. So depending on what you studied, you can apply for the one that most closely matches your background. Oops, this is a pretty sensitive computer, but anyway, we're 70 years old. I took this picture a few weeks ago. The UN projected all kinds of nice pictures on the side of the UN, so it's our 70th birthday. Survived this long. Survived even longer. The word international civil servant was mentioned a few times already. I'm an international civil servant. What does it mean? It means I don't work for any national government. Sarah works for a government, country. And we always interacting. This is how the UN works. It's always an interaction between the Secretariat, the UN, people like myself, represented at the highest level by the Secretary General, and Sarah and her colleagues in her mission and all the other missions. How many member states are there? Right there. What was the last one to join? You guys are good. Most of our audiences are not that good, believe me. So what does it mean to be an international civil servant? It means that we don't take instructions from any government directly. We cannot give any favors or to any government specifically. We only allowed to work with the interest of the United Nations in mind. Our oath of office says we can only take instructions from the Secretary General and his designated officials. In practice, it means that if I'm from Saudi Arabia and somebody from the Saudi Arabian permanent mission asks me for some information that's not yet public or officially available, I have to say, sorry, can't give it to you because it's not yet open to be given out, or something like that. We're just giving a sort of an example of what it entails, that if there's a conflict between your country and another country, you have to think in the UN way. You're impartial. You're not taking sides in a way you would if you were representing your own country. So again, the way of thinking, the way of writing and everything is different. We, the Secretariat, we're the mothership. We're the big ones out there amongst all the UN organizations. We have over 41,000 civilian staff and over 100,000 uniformed personnel. Now, how many of you have been at UN headquarters in New York? Almost all of you. Good. I hope you have school trips there or something like that. We've been renovating. We're almost there. We're almost done with that. Still ongoing to a small extent. Of course, we're not just in New York, which is, as I said, the headquarters, but we're also in Geneva. We're in Vienna. I worked in Vienna for 5 years, or more over 5 years in my career. We're also in Nairobi. We've been there briefly to work. It's the most beautiful UN campus. We're in the regional commissions, for example, in Beirut for West Asia, in Bangkok for Latin America, for Asia and Pacific. I worked there also. Latin America and the Caribbean are Santiago de Chile. We're also in Geneva for Europe, and in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I worked there for 5 years in Ethiopia. We have the tribunals for the war crimes in former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Plus we have peacekeeping operations. So a lot of times you would work in a peacekeeping operation as a civilian. And we also have what's called the special political missions. Who can tell me one very obvious visual difference between the two? Just looking at them, at the people who work there. What's one big difference between a peacekeeping operation and a special political mission? Think of the first picture I showed you. You're close, you're getting close. Not quite that, but the peacekeeping operations have both civilian and military. We have the blue helmets, the blue berets, and police contingents. While the special political missions are purely civilian. There are some hybrids and a little bit of sort of overlap, maybe if you want to call it that, but in general, peacekeeping is where the Security Council has told us that we can have military contingents, and there are a certain mandate. While the special political missions are purely civilian. But in both cases, we need a lot of civilian expertise. We need people who can do logistics, administration, IT, telecommunications, aviation movements. We need people who also can do reintegration, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, elections, all these sort of things that help build up a society and their judicial system, the police structure, all these things. So, for example, I've been in 2 peacekeeping missions. I was in Cambodia and UNTAC. I ran a polling station in Battambang in northwestern Cambodia. It was one of the most interesting experiences I've had in the UN. Because at that point I was part of Cambodian history. You never forget that. You are running a polling station in their first open elections in their history. So that was a great experience. And I was in the former Yugoslavia. I was in Bosnia and Croatia for a year during the war there, during the peacekeeping operations. And this is where you really see the UN in action. This is where you see why the UN is such an important organization that has the credibility and capability of doing things that no other organization gets to do. And that's something that I would recommend everybody to do as part of their UN career, because you see the UN in a very different way from when you're sitting in an office in New York or Geneva or Vienna. So we have a list of things. I won't rattle them off, but I guess many of you are studying political science, something similar to that. That's of course one major area in the UN, but it's also probably the most competitive area. If anybody is studying engineering or aviation safety, please raise your hand because we have a job for you. So there are a lot of things here that are not normally associated with the UN. When you think of jobs in the UN, you think more of diplomacy and things like that. But actually we have a whole range of different types of jobs. And then again, the other UN organizations have other types of jobs. If you're a public health specialist or a nuclear scientist or whatever you are, there are jobs in the UN family for you. Now, you may be familiar with these. The Sustainable Development Goals have just been approved by the General Assembly. This is our mandate, so to speak, for the next 15 years for all UN organizations in some way or another. These are successors to the Millennium Development Goals, and they cover all areas you can imagine as far as what needs to be improved in the world. So this is the sort of thing that all UN organizations and governments, of course, and NGOs will be working toward the coming 15 years. Now we're going to get a little bit more complicated. How do you get there? How do you get into the UN? All UN organizations tend to advertise specific vacancies. We call them vacancy announcements or job openings or job notices, whatever they call them. They are specific jobs. There's no point giving me your resume and saying, well, can you contact me if there's a job that suits my background? It doesn't work like that. You have to apply to a specific job, and you market yourself in relation to that specific job. And our application form is a lot more elaborate than a normal US resume or a CV, as the British would say. And we ask a lot of questions that are illegal in the US or the UK or anywhere else. But with the UN, we can ask those questions, and we have reason to ask. It's not frivolous, it's really because we need to know these things for various reasons. And so the point is that we advertise each job specifically, and you need to apply each time in relation to the requirements of that specific job. It says generic up there, but generic just means that it's a specific job. It just will not tell you where it's located, because that's how peacekeeping advertises. For peacekeeping operations, you will see something called field missions or multiple duty stations indicated. That is to create a roster. And then later on they advertise a specific job in Kabul or Juba or Kinshasa or El Fasher or wherever it may be. And then only those who are on the roster can express their interest, because they've already been vetted and have been deemed suitable for that kind of job. So be aware of that, because when you apply, you need to always target a specific job and not send something generic each time or sort of a general application form. We have exam systems. I'll talk about that in a few minutes to save time here. There's something else called JPOs, which is people who work for the UN but are sponsored by their own government. It's for young professionals. The YPP exam is something you should all be interested in. I'll talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. That's for young people to join the UN who do not have much work experience. We also have local staff and consultants and so on. We also have interns. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. We've actually had an intern in my office from this very program that you're in Seton Hall. One thing to know about is the UN volunteers. That's another way you can work for the UN. UN volunteers always work in the field. The minimum age is 25. You have to have at least 2 years work experience. You need to apply to the UNV office. It's in Bonn, Germany, run by UNDP. And they provide staff, volunteers, to the field operations. In peacekeeping and SPMs, we have about 3,000 volunteers at any given moment. UNDP, UNICEF, UNHCR, WFP, all the field-based operations have volunteers working for them. Volunteers do get an allowance, not working for free, but it's less than what a staff member would get doing the same thing. So if you want to be a volunteer, you can go to unv.org and find out how it works. You need to spend at least 12 months as a volunteer in the field before you can apply for another regular UN position in the field. And it cannot be in the same field mission. There's an online volunteering program. You can sit at home in front of your computer and help out an NGO or a UN office in doing something that can be done online. You don't get paid, but you get a nice certificate at the end. The youth volunteer program is only for a few countries that sponsor it. For people who are between 18 and 29, you have to look at more details on their website. I don't think it's a very broad program yet. Now, we have a grading system like any civil service. You may have heard of these levels. P stands for professional, so P2 is the normal entry level for any UN organization for young people who don't have work experience or very little work experience. But each UN organization hires P2s in a different way. The way we do it in the Secretariat is to have a competitive exam, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, whereby you have to pass this exam and then get selected from a roster. In that case, you don't need to have any work experience, though many people have it already, of course, by the time they get hired. If we advertise a P2 level job directly, then you need to have at least 2 years work experience. And above P2, we advertise all the jobs individually. So if you see a P3 economic affairs officer, Bangkok, it will tell you exactly level, location, responsibilities, and all the other details. And you will need to have 5 years work experience minimum. How do we know that? You need to put the dates of your work experience in your application form. And our system is very good at counting, so if you have 4 years, 11 months, that's not enough. 5 is the absolute minimum. Many people have 7 or 10 years when they apply for a P3. And that's if you have a master's or PhD, sorry. With only a bachelor's, you have to add 2 more years. So 7 years for a P3, for example. We are one of the few UN organizations that still accepts people with bachelors. UNDP, UNICEF, etc. will not look at you if you don't have at least a master's degree. So keep that in mind when you're applying to a UN office. Okay, this is for young people. We have something called the YPP, the Young Professionals Program. Anybody here ever applied for it, or yeah, you have? No, not yet. Maybe in future. There are certain restrictions and parameters here which don't apply to any other job or any other level. This is for P2 entry level. Because here you cannot be more than 32 years old to apply, but for any other job you can be up to close to 65, our retirement age. But here, to be a candidate for the YPP, first of all, you cannot be more than 32 years old, and you have to be a national. You have to hold a passport of a participating country. What does that mean? The YPP exam is designed to bring people in from countries that we consider underrepresented. We have a system whereby each country has a desirable number, a desirable range, we call it, of staff. And if a country falls below that range, we will invite it to participate in the YPP exam. The country has to agree to participate, so it's not automatic. And those countries that agree to participate, that have been invited by us, they are nationals. People who hold a passport of those countries can then take this exam. It's only held once a year. This year it will be the 15th of December. The application period has already closed. And you have to have a degree that's relevant to the exam topics that we offer that particular year. So this year, we're, for example, offering administration, finance, legal affairs, and a few others. Next year, we probably will offer political affairs, economic affairs, and who knows what else. It depends on our projected needs for the coming 2 years. So you need to check whether you meet all those requirements before you start applying to the YPP. As I said, right now it's too late for this year, but for next year, you need to check the website around April. I would say April would be the best time to start checking which countries and which subjects are involved in the YPP for next year's exam cycle. So it's only given once a year. Quickly, the language exam for people who want to be translators and interpreters, they need to take an exam also. And once they pass, they get put on the roster. So if you want to be a Russian interpreter, typically you need to have 3 languages, in this case Russian as your main language, and 2 other passive languages, English and French, or English and Spanish, or whatever combination we're looking for. And both the YPP and the language exams are based on, first of all, an exam, and secondly, passing means that you can put on the roster and you're selected from the roster. So even being on the roster is not a 100% guarantee of the job. JPOs are another way to join. We call them associate experts. It's the same thing as JPO. Everybody says JPO, Junior Professional Officer. This is a program which is sponsored by certain member states for their own nationals. So if your country is sponsoring a JPO program, you have to apply for this program through your foreign ministry's website, typically. The good news is the US State Department has started sponsoring a few more for the Secretariat and, of course, for other UN organizations. It's for young people to join, normally for 2 years. Their salaries are paid by their country, not by the UN, but they're doing exactly the same thing as UN staff. And after those 2 years, they become great candidates for regular UN jobs, normally at the P3 level. So the retention rate for JPOs then becoming staff is very good. It's a very good way to join the UN. It's a competitive process, but the competition is against nationals of your own country, and it's run through your foreign ministry, not by the UN. We are then the beneficiaries of that process. We get a good JPO to work for us for typically 2 years from that participating country. We have, I think, a very good pay and benefits system. Our salaries are based on the U.S. civil service salaries plus a factor of about 15% more, because we're trying to attract expatriates. So it's 15% more than the U.S. civil service in Washington, plus another list of benefits. For example, we pay for you and your family to travel and to be installed, plus their shipment of goods. In the new duty station where they're going, we pay for you and your family to go on home leave every 2 years, to provide a pension plan, health insurance, education grant for your children. Some of these are strictly expatriate benefits, so if you're working in your own country in the UN, like you're American working in New York, you don't get home leave because you're in your home country already and you don't get education grant. But as soon as you're outside the US working for the UN in Switzerland or Bangkok, of course the US citizen would get all the expatriate benefits. We pay you more if you are working in a difficult duty station also. Some duty stations are non-family, which means that you cannot even have your immediate family with you in those places. You get more money to compensate for that too. Now the internship program, we changed the rules last year, and I happen to be the one who's in charge of internship policy also in the UN. So we managed to change the rules. Normally, you have to be a student in a master's or a PhD program when you're doing your internship. That's still true, but we've added another opportunity for those who are in their last year of a bachelor's program, where you can be an intern in that year also. Plus, you can be an intern even if you graduated already from a bachelor's, master's, or PhD, as long as you can start your internship within a year of graduation. So there are broader opportunities now. Internships available all over the world. Every so-called family duty station offers internships. We advertise them just like jobs, so you have to check whatever department is advertising internships worldwide. You have to keep applying to whatever one of those you're interested in. Unfortunately, we have no funds from the General Assembly to pay for interns, but it's a great experience for those who want to experience the UN as a full-time job for a few months, minimum 2, maximum 6 months. Many of our interns fall in love with the UN and want to stay on. Unfortunately, you cannot stay on right away. You have to observe a 6-month break between your internship and starting to apply for professional level jobs in the UN. But it's a great way to get to know the UN. As I said, I had an intern from Seton Hall some years ago. So the students from this university, of course, also have a chance. But it's a competitive process. It's like any other application in the UN. It's competitive. You need to apply several times and keep trying. Everything is on our website, careers.un.org, which is this one. You can see links to the YPP, Associate Expert, JPO, volunteers, internships, and all are there if you want to go to the website. There are 150 profiles of my colleagues here. I have to edit all of them, so I know that. You can read where they're from, you can read what they're doing, which country they're serving in, how they joined the UN. You can see many different ways of joining the UN, their challenges, and so on. So it'd be good to read some of those to just get a sense of what kind of people are working in the UN. Now, the application, well, I don't want to go into everything, but you have to complete what's called a PHP, a personal history profile. Everything's online. The best candidates will be then given a written assessment. Those who are best at that will be interviewed either by Skype or by telephone or in person. There's a review board that looks at everything. Then, if everything is okay, there's a list of recommended candidates that goes to the head of the department, and the head of the department will then select the one candidate to be chosen for that job. The rest of them who are recommended but not selected get put on a roster, and we can select from the roster if we want. For peacekeeping, it's the same, except there's no selection. It's only the roster at the end. Then later, they advertise, as I said, a specific job in, I don't know, say Kinshasa or Mogadishu or wherever. And then those who are on the roster, and only those on the roster can then apply for that particular job. Okay, the PhD asks for a lot of information, nationalities, plural, even nationality at birth, education, your work experience, a lot of detail. Languages also, all the languages you know, even if you don't know it very well, put how well you know it there. If you speak English, don't forget that you speak English. A lot of Americans and native English speakers forget that they speak English and they don't put it. It's so obvious, they wrote the whole thing in English, so it's obvious I'm American. I speak English. No, it's not obvious to our computer. So write fluent read, write, speak, understand English, okay? Because the computer is designed to eliminate those who don't speak English if that's required. References, we just need 3 names and contact information in case we need to talk to people who know you well. Pre-screening questions, we ask you if you're suitable. It's yes, no is binary. You know, if we're looking for a doctor and we ask, do you have a degree in medicine? And you say no, we don't really need to look at you any further, right? So this kind of question. Cover letter is extremely important, whether it's an internship, it's a job, or an exam that you're applying for. Please take time with this application. Take time writing a cover letter. Have somebody check it. Don't do it in the last minute. One thing that happens is that people write generic cover letters. Of course, they're one person. They've led the same life. And they forget to modify it, to adapt it to the particular job they're applying to. So we get people who copy and paste 10, 20, 30 cover letters. It's all the same, and they're very pleased to apply for the European Union. And they've killed themselves right there because we're not the EU, we're the UN. So this happens all the time. Also what happens is that people stay at the very idealistic level. They say, I love the UN, I'd love to work for the UN, I'd really be happy to get a job at the UN, and so on and so on. And that's the cover letter. It's great, but tell us what you offer. What are you offering to us? What makes you a great candidate for this particular job? That's what you need to tell us. How do you meet the requirements, the competencies, the education, the experience, the languages, whatever it is that we're looking for. So be careful with this. Take your time. It's a mini essay that needs to tell us what you're all about and how you meet the requirements. What is it that you offer? Not what we can offer you. We get people who say, I want to join the UN so I can learn Spanish. That's not why we're going to hire you. Okay? And remember, it's an extremely competitive process. There'll be at least 300 or 500 or 1,000 people applying for that very same internship or very same job. So to stand out, you really need to do a good job here. We have something called competencies. I mentioned it briefly. The UN has core values, as you'd imagine: integrity, professionalism, respect for diversity. Every job opening, including internships and exams, have a subset of these competencies. So you may have 3 or 4 or 5 maximum of these. Make sure you keep a copy of the job opening text as a PDF or a printout, so you know, because it'll disappear after 60 days. It'll be gone from the website, you won't be able to find it. So keep a copy of whatever you applied for. So in case you get called for an interview, we'll be testing you on the competencies that were listed. Maybe communication, teamwork, and client orientation, let's say, for example, a subset. You need to prepare concrete examples on how you met these in the past, from your own experience, not from your friends or your sisters or from a book or hypotheticals. Your own examples is what we're looking for. And there you would have to follow sort of this model. There are several models, but tell us first the context. What was the situation? I was trying to arrange a basketball tournament, let's say. That's what we're trying to do. What happened? Yes, we did this and that and that. Make sure you talk about yourself. I did this, I did that. Don't talk about we did this and we did that, because otherwise we don't know what you did. We're trying to hire you, not the team. Okay, it went wrong. We couldn't get a court. We were messing around trying to find a court. That's what happened. That was the outcome. The result was we couldn't hold the tournament. What did you learn? That's what we're trying to get at. Are you self-aware? Can you reflect on the past and learn from it? So what would you do differently next time? Oh, I would try to get the court first before I try to arrange a basketball tournament. For example, don't say, oh, I wouldn't do anything differently. You always learn something. But prepare examples where you learn something to show us that you are able to think and reflect on what happened and learn from your past. We're not judging or criticizing. We're just trying to see how you are able to process past events and learn from them. We have a guide on that on our website. If you dig through, you'll find it. And we're in social media, including China Weibo for the Chinese market. Our LinkedIn has collapsed lately, so it's not working right now. That was a very quick summary, so I hope I didn't go too quickly like that. Q&A at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was remarkable. And there are more questions than answers in my mind. I'm sure we'll get to them later.
Glad to hear.
But at this moment, I'd like to welcome Sarah to the podium and give her perspective from the delegation and coming from a foreign ministry as diplomats.
Thank you. It feels so good to be back. I think it's been 3 years since I was last on campus at graduation. So thank you for the invitation to speak. Thank you, Dr. Ruby, for adding me on to the presentation. I think we thought it might be a nice contrast to learn more about the foreign service programs and the internship programs at Missions. I wanted to speak as an alumni of the program, so not necessarily as a foreign service officer, but more as somebody who handles these portfolios for a mission and who's learned a lot from interacting with students and from professionals coming in. So these are more of like lessons learned, how you can improve applications as well for our missions. And so the first thing to know when applying to a permanent mission is the structure. Unlike the UN, we have very specific needs at each mission where you can be used. And so the permanent representative's office, who is the head of mission, we then have the deputy permanent representative. They have everything from administrative positions to political decisions. Security council teams, a little self-explanatory, but country teams or region-specific teams. So we might have people who work on security council reform, who work on Central African Republic, who work on Middle East portfolios. The General Assembly Committee, so plenary, who deal with everything from First Committee to Sixth Committee, and I'm sure you're familiar with the committees as this program is very UN intensive. And so when you're applying, you'll want to keep in mind the different areas in which you can fit into the mission. Additionally, and some of the parts of the structures that people don't necessarily know about are the elections department. And so I personally deal with designing campaigns for Saudi Arabia when we go to run for the Human Rights Council or Security Council, or when we have candidates, experts at the national level for Committee Against Torture, Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is interesting, and it's not necessarily a part of missions that are usually thought of, but you have sort of that design and the lobbying, aspect of the mission, the meeting and negotiating different resolutions. For the political side of it, this is, negotiating support, seeing what we can give one country, they can give us. The protocol division, which is always my favorite, learning protocol in foreign ministries is very important. It might sound a little benign, who sits where, but a big, huge faux pas, President Obama walking in on one side while, President of another country walking in and bumping into each other can actually wind up getting to a really big issue. And so you sort of learn on how to avoid these tricky situations. It's also useful, in any other diplomatic role you would wind up being in. The Media and Outreach Division, for a lot of you who are studying communications degrees, in addition to diplomacy and international relations, everything from structures of Facebook and Twitter to how do you talk to journalists, what kind of information do you form and give journalists from different stations. The way you structure your message is very important, especially at the UN where you're dealing with 192 other countries and you're trying to make sure that the message you're giving is very clear and very straightforward. And then the administrative side is a part of every internship or job opportunity, and so the support staff of all of the missions. So I wanted to talk about some of the benefits of working at the permanent missions versus working at the United Nations. A lot of these overlap, but it's just nice to go through them. So you get the government side of policy making and negotiation. And so when you're sitting in the room at 5 in the morning with 50 other countries trying to decide where the funds go, does it go to UN Women, does it go to UNDP, which program in these different divisions does it go to? This is a big deal. The member states are the ones that are making these decisions, and so you get to learn about it from the decision making at the mission, sending it back to capital, getting that decision back. Sometimes they agree with you, sometimes they don't, and then going into the UN and putting those all of your chips on the table basically and having that discussion. Chance to work on various committees and different departments, various projects. Especially if you're an intern, some people think when you come into the mission you're going to be working on one committee. We like to give interns opportunities to work in various committees, especially when you're a foreign service officer. Some governments hire you specifically for one desk. Some hire you for the potential you'll have for all the different desks. I started on the legal team with a counterterrorism background. I then went into funds and programs and negotiating budgets, which was absolutely nothing I knew anything about. And now I'm working on elections and campaigning, which is also something I knew nothing about. So it's very much learning on your feet. Very much, something new every day, which I think is why people apply to the UN in general. It's very exciting. The mission can also give you that sort of structure. Working with UN agencies and NGOs, going to bilateral and multilateral meetings, so, country to country or various countries around the table, which is interesting because then you're sitting on the government side of it. Networking, diplomats and staff, and then also learning more, for those who are interning at missions, learning more about the foreign service opportunities. Every foreign service has a very different structure. When I was going to start applying for jobs, I thought, I'm a dual national, applied to the U.S. Foreign Service, applied to the Saudi Foreign Service. The U.S. Foreign Service was significantly more structured. You sat for an exam and you decided one of 5 different fields: consular, diplomatic, outreach, and then the interview process was very similar. The Saudi Foreign Service, you go in for an exam, you apply to the Foreign Service in general, and then you get placed where you get placed. And so you're more, both are wonderful, both have their advantages and disadvantages. It just depends on what you're looking for in an opportunity. So interning and working at different missions gives you that opportunity to learn more about the specific country. So the difference between applying to the UN in a specific position is that no matter where you're from in the world, you can apply to that one post. When it comes to permanent missions, a lot of this depends on your country of nationality. And so Saudi Arabia will only hire diplomats and interns from Saudi Arabia. It's actually a new policy that had a lot to do with security measures that were put in place. The U.S. mission will hire, depending on your visa, I think, will hire people from different countries depending on what university you're at in your application. And so it's more of an open opportunity. Don't be discouraged. If you're interested in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia says, no, we're looking for somebody who's Saudi, look for regional missions. So, anybody else in the Middle East, North Africa, sometimes you'll be able to find a little niche. If you're wind up finding something there, look for permanent missions of organizations. And so following the Middle East example, the Organization of Islamic Conference or the Gulf Cooperation Council, League of Arab States. A lot of times they look for interns who aren't from the countries of their population or their membership. They get a lot of feedback. And so it's nice, you wind up learning a lot more from working with a bunch of different missions on the organization side. Language skills, be very honest. We get a lot of interns who tell us that they're fluent in Arabic and then they start day one. And it's not an issue, you can learn, but we ask you to write a table and you don't know what you're doing language-wise. Be truthful. It's not an issue if you're not fluent. So if you have basic Spanish, say basic Spanish, submit a writing sample. That's always helpful. We don't require a writing sample, but when the students take initiative or the professional takes initiative to show us that they have those skills, we appreciate it more, and actually we wind up hiring those people. Internships, I'm sure you guys all know this, so I'll brush through really quickly. There's seasonal internships, General Assembly, they're only looking for a few weeks, to academic schedule, fall, spring, summer. Don't be afraid to ask. Not a lot of missions have it on their website, or when you first call, they don't advertise that they have internships. And so call, make that first step, say I'm interested, I'm a graduate student at Seton Hall. This is what I'm interested in doing. Nobody is going to say, oh, we really don't want interns. Everybody needs help. And so take that initiative to reach out. And then check the requirements, like the example of the language skills. We only take graduate students. And so when we get an internship application from an undergrad who's like, oh, can you make an exception for me? That looks bad. But if it's an undergrad who's saying, listen, I know you take graduate students only if you have enough space or if you're taking extra people, I'm making that initiative to give you my application so you can put on hand. The way you word things is very, very important. For full-time employment for Foreign Service officers, a lot of this is done from the national level. And so don't be discouraged if you email a permanent mission organization about full-time jobs and they say, oh, head back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. That's not them brushing you off. That's just very much the way it works. A lot of security clearances go through that way. And so it's not them saying we don't have an opportunity for you. It's just very much a procedure. There's also another section of local hires, which is always an option. Depending on the mission, they'll need help for full-time staff members who are not in school, for General Assembly for 6 months at a time, for 9 months at a time. And so ask and see if there are opportunities to be a local hire as opposed to full-time. So brief overview of the application. The cover letter, as John was saying, is very important. They're not obsolete. There are a lot of people who say, you know, cover letters are obsolete. They're just very basic overview information. You're going to get it in the resume or CV. That's not the case. If I get a resume that's wonderful, and has a lot of information, but doesn't necessarily tell me where I can place the person, that's not helpful. And so I wind up writing back saying, what can you offer us? Where do you want to work at the mission? Do you want to work on media and outreach? Do you want to work on disarmament? Do you have any experience in human rights? So make sure you tailor that cover letter really, really specifically. Resume, same thing, tailor it. Also, please send it in a PDF, because when you have names or words in different languages and it has that red squiggly line, that doesn't look really good. So transfer it into a PDF, just a little pet peeve. And writing samples, English writing sample and other writing samples, if you have them, are really, really important. A lot of the negotiations depend on wording, so we want to see the type of language you use. Is it very basic? Is it at a higher level? Is it diplomatic? Or is it very blunt? Not necessarily good or bad either way, just you need to find a way of fitting you in properly to the right department. So this was the over. I found this very interesting, just as an example of something not to do. This intern submitted his resume, no cover letter, and put in, there was no education, there was no jobs, it was just very much training courses and hobbies. Right? The training courses tell you what the training course was used for, what competency, if you will, but there was no way to check and make sure that this person had taken any of these courses before. Hobbies are great. I was told when I was going through undergrad that it's a way of starting conversation during an interview. If you want to send in an updated resume after you've already been selected for the interview to kind of kick it off, that's great. I don't necessarily need to know that this candidate liked fishing. It doesn't necessarily show me what you can do. Although patience maybe is a good thing, you're sitting there fishing all day, not catching anything.
Fishing by sending this in.
There we go. This, I don't know if there's no like identifying information. This student sent in, this is a perfect example of a wonderful resume that we got. It looks like there are typos though from the red squiggly lines. I would know that that's a big family company back home, but if he had sent it in a PDF, it would have just looked a lot nicer. So